All right, we're reading Little Green Men, finally. Yay.
Yay.
Chapter 1.
Chapter 1 of Little Green Men. Okay. Dr. Donald Bridge snapped the latex glove off and tossed it into the garbage under the counter, then started toward the emergency room desk as Denise, his nurse, put away the last of the equipment. You sure, Doc? Mr. Archer asked, his voice still full of worry. Bridge stopped and smiled at the older man sitting on the bed. The drapes that had given the area privacy now open. Archer's slight gut hung over his brown belt, making him look heavier than his measured weight. His undershirt was clean and white, accenting the hardened and leathery skin of a man who had spent many years in the sun. Bridge hoped he was in as good a shape at 62 as Archer was at this moment. Your heart is as healthy as they come, Bridge said confidently as the older man slipped on his plaid shirt. Trust me, the pains you have been feeling are just gas, and I've got something behind the desk that will do the trick. The look of relief that slowly crept over Mr. Archer's face made Bridge smile. Finish getting dressed and I'll meet you up front. Archer nodded and slid off the bed. Thanks, Doc. Bridge turned, and 3 steps later he had entered the medical supply closet near the check-in area where they kept all the sample-sized medications. Heartburn treatment was one of his favorites. Nothing dangerous and very easy to cure in the short term. Too bad every patient who came through the front doors weren't as easy to fix as Mr. Archer. So far, Mr. Archer's bad case of heartburn was the worst problem Bridge had seen all day. It had only taken a few blood tests and 15 minutes on the electrocardiograph to confirm that no heart incident was going on. If the day stayed this mild for just 2 more hours, Bridge knew he was going to make his plane. And then all he had to do was enjoy 6 wonderful days fishing in Alaska, far from the desert of New Mexico and the smell of emergency rooms and late-night phone calls. He could almost taste that wonderful fresh mountain air now. Doctor, Anne said, her voice insistent. Anne Haynes was the emergency room's main receptionist, and over the last 3 years that Bridge had been here. He had never seen her ruffled over anything. She just kept people calm, did the paperwork flawlessly, and smiled more than she frowned. But now she was using the tone she only used when she needed help at once in the front. Bridge quickly stepped out of the supply closet and into the reception area. During the 3 years he had been here since finishing his residency in Phoenix, he had seen every type of medical emergency come through those sliding glass doors. Gunshot wounds, stabbings, broken bones, concussions, and heart attacks. Facing the new and unknown problem was what kept him interested and why he had picked emergency room medicine in the first place. But not in his wildest nightmare could he have imagined the sight that now greeted him. A man stood in front of the counter with an upset woman beside him, and he was green. Hands, face, ears, arms, all of his exposed skin was green. He looked like a miniature Jolly Green Giant from the old television ads. Bridge didn't know whether to laugh or to be worried. Clearly, the green man was more annoyed than in any sort of pain, and the annoyance was directed at his wife, more than likely the one who had insisted they come in. Both of them seemed to be in their early 60s and healthy except for the man's color. There just wasn't anything healthy looking about bright green skin. He had on short-sleeved shirt, slacks, and she had on golf slacks that had a light sweater over a pink blouse. They were dressed like they had just come from the golf course. Maybe something had happened there. Bridge couldn't even remember reading about anything like this before. The man looked, at least across the counter dividing Anne's desk from the waiting area, as if his skin pigment had changed colors. There was no immediate sign of dye, and from the looks of these two, and how upset the woman seemed, this wasn't some sort of joke. Bridge moved from behind the counter and into the front area, extending his hand towards the green man. I'm Dr. Bridge, he said. What happened? The green man shook Bridge's hand, his grasp firm and dry. Greg Henry, he said, this is my wife Betty. He waved a green hand at the woman beside him. Nothing happened. I feel fine. Had a good round going, too. He just turned green is all, Mrs. Henry said, head to foot, right before my eyes. Well, Bridge said, making lists of possible causes in his head, why don't you come on back, Mr. Henry, and we'll do some tests. Your wife can fill out the paperwork Anne needs, I'm sure. Thanks, Doctor, Mrs. Henry said, the worry in her eyes not far below the surface. I feel fine, Mr. Henry said. Just do as the doctor suggests, the older woman said, her face solid and forceful. I don't want you glowing in the dark and keeping me awake. Mr. Henry waved a hand dismissing his wife's joke as both Anne and Bridge laughed. Dr. Bridge escorted Greg Henry to a bed next to where Mr. Archer was just finishing putting on his shoes. Suddenly, Anne's insistent voice again called out from the front desk. Doctor! A slight pause, then, Doctor! It was the most uncontrolled Bridge had ever heard her voice. Jump up here, he said to Henry, patting the emergency room bed. I'll be right back. He quickly headed back to the reception desk. There, both Anne and Mrs. Henry were staring at two more green people coming through the door. And outside the glass entrance, a car pulled up and another green person got out. The first thought that came to Bridge's mind was that his fishing trip was going to have to be postponed. Then, as yet another car screeched to a halt outside with another victim in the passenger seat, Bridge realized there was a lot more at stake here than his lost fishing trip. With one hand on Anne's shoulder, he whispered in her ear, go to a back office and get General Drake at the base on the line. I think we have a real problem here. Then call in all the other doctors. As soon as she left to follow his orders, Bridge moved around the counter and did his best to calm the strangely colored people and their worried relatives who were quickly filling the waiting area. And as he did, Mrs. Henry slowly turned a pale shade of green. Okay, sorry. I feel like I should paint my face green for when we read this book. Okay. Max knew something was going to go wrong today. He just knew it. The day had been too perfect so far, and for some reason there hadn't been too many perfect days lately. The sky was clear, the temperature just a little cool. His mom had been in a good mood. Perfect. So what was going to go wrong? He tried to shake the thought as he pulled open the front door to the Crashdown Cafe and stepped inside. He always felt comfortable here, as if he was walking into his own room at home. The smell of bacon that Michael was cooking on the fryer hung in the air like a thick perfume, flavoring just about everything. Liz worked at cleaning the last few tables from the lunch rush, and Maria sat at the counter piling her tips in neat stacks of dimes, nickels, quarters, and bills. Two tourists were in the front booth just finishing their Saturn shakes, while Alex read in the second booth, nursing a cherry Coke like it was the last drink he would ever see. Everything normal. Max let himself relax a little. He had been having this bad feeling all day since his family left for church this morning, but so far nothing was going wrong. He couldn't put his finger on what had sparked this unease, and now he was determined not to let it ruin a perfectly beautiful Sunday afternoon in early March. Liz glanced over at him as the door closed and her eyes lit up, the smile filling her face, making her look even more beautiful to Max if that was possible. He loved the way she looked at him. He loved everything about her, actually. The long dark hair, her deep brown eyes, the smile that never seemed to be too far away from her face when he was around. She lit up everything in his life, making every day more special than the one before. He couldn't imagine losing her, and yet that seemed to be what had happened this last year. I'm sorry. Max. Okay. At times like this, he wondered why they had so many problems, why she kept pushing him away. Someday he hoped to understand that, if nothing else. He waved without lifting his arm, smiling as he headed for the booth with Alex. Cherry Coke? Liz asked, brushing his arm as he went past. The touch made him grin even more and wish for even more, even though he knew it couldn't happen. Thanks, he said, trying to hold on to her hand as she moved away, not really wanting to let it go. Alex let out a sigh and shook his head. You two are disgustingly cute at times, you know that? Max slid into the booth across from Alex, never taking his gaze off Liz. At least we used to be, Max said. Alex shook his head. You know, I never have understood what happened. That makes two of us. Max settled back in the comfortable cushion of the booth and watched as Liz filled a glass with ice and some cherry syrup. After the events of the past few months, with the blue crystals in the cave and the Christmas events in Phoenix, it was nice just to have everything calm. He really needed to shake the foreboding feeling that something was going to happen. There was nothing wrong with this day remaining calm enough that he and Liz might be able to spend some time together to start to get things back on track. He couldn't remember the last time they had been able to do that. Alex had gone back to his book. Max looked at it but couldn't see the title. Alex sure seemed absorbed in it, and he seemed calm too. Nothing ever seemed to bother him. You superstitious, Alex? Max asked. No, Alex said, not looking up, but I don't walk under ladders, if that's what you mean. It would be just my luck to have one fall on my head. Max laughed. Alex wasn't as helpless as he had made himself out to be. Why? Alex frowned, marking his place with his left hand. Is there something to be superstitious about? No, I was just thinking it's too calm today, Max said, and I'm afraid that means something is going to happen. Spring fever, Alex said, laughing lightly. Does that to all of us. Maybe you're right, Max said. He sure hoped so. He took a deep breath and settled even more into the booth. He was probably just nervous because he'd hoped to patch things up with Liz tonight. He was going to invite her to spend some time with him alone. Maybe then he could repair whatever had gone wrong. Behind him, the bell over the door of the restaurant jingled, announcing a new arrival. Across the booth, Alex glanced up and then back to his book for a moment before yanking his head up and staring over Max's shoulder. Max didn't want to turn around. He knew that whoever had just come in threatened his night with Liz, threatened the peace that he had hoped to get out of today. And if he ignored the person, he might just go away. Then Alex broke into gales of laughter, and Max couldn't help himself. He swung around to look. What? Kyle said, moving from the front door to the counter. Everyone in the restaurant was silent except for Alex, who was still laughing. All of them, including the two tourists, were staring at Kyle. Max couldn't believe what he was seeing. Kyle's skin, at least his hands and face, were a pretty good shade of green, the kind of green you see on a ripe avocado. What? Kyle demanded. Halloween is still a long ways off, Maria said, shaking her head and going back to counting her tips. Take the body paint back, Kyle. It's not scary. Have all of you people gone mad? Kyle asked. Maybe Kyle's in a play, Liz suggested, trying to placate him. Max hated it when she treated Kyle that way, as if he were important to her. Max still couldn't get the image of the two of them in Liz's bed out of his mind. I think you're too short to play Frankenstein, Alex said. Maybe he's the Frog Prince, Maria said. Kyle looked puzzled. Is this some kind of joke? You tell us, Max said quietly. I'm not the one being funny here, Kyle snapped. Could have fooled me, Maria said. Will someone explain what's going on? Kyle's voice rose in frustration. Your skin, Liz said, taking a tall cherry Coke past Kyle towards Max. It sort of clashes with your blue shirt, if you know what I mean. Kyle held up his hands and stared at them. It was clear to Max that until that moment, Kyle hadn't noticed his skin had turned green, which meant it must have happened fairly fast. Granted, Kyle wasn't the most observant person Max had ever met, but not noticing that something had turned your own skin green was even beyond Kyle's abilities to ignore. Man, what did you get into? Michael asked, coming out of the kitchen, wiping his hands on a towel before draping it over his shoulder. You look like a bad St. Patrick's Day milkshake. I don't know, Kyle said, moving closer to Maria so he could look at his face in the mirror. It was also green and seemingly getting darker by the moment. Pea soup does that to you, Maria said, glancing up at him before going to finish her count. Then she started picking up the coins. Never touched the stuff myself. Too much to drink last night, Kyle? Alex asked. You look a little green. Everyone but Kyle laughed. This isn't funny, he said, not looking away from the mirror. Maybe not to you, Maria muttered. Again, everyone snickered. For once, Max agreed with Kyle. Max wasn't at all sure this was funny. Kyle pulled open his shirt and looked out at his own stomach. I'm green all over. He turned around so everyone could see his green chest and stomach. All over? Michael asked, smiling and winking at Max and Liz. Sorry.
Hard for you.
Anyway, mind in the gutter. Don't go there, Maria said, her voice stern as she pointed a finger at Michael. Michael laughed and moved down the counter closer to Kyle. Maria stood with a hand on Kyle's shoulder, moved him around behind the counter to the sink. Try washing it off. It could be worse, Alex said as Kyle ran his hands under the water. At least you have a spring color. Again, everyone but Max and Kyle laughed, including the two tourists. But as Kyle lifted his wet hands up and it was clear nothing was washing off, Max knew this was serious. I'd say we need to get you down to the hospital, Max said, scooting to the edge of the booth seat and getting ready to stand. Let's find out what caused this. I agree, Liz said, also starting to frown at how the color hadn't washed off. Kyle was staring in the mirror, looking stunned at the green face staring back. At least it's not turning your hair green, Alex said. Maria just shook her head at the comment, and Liz gave Alex a dark look. What? Alex said. You know, Max said, glancing at Alex across the booth and then doing a double take. You're not looking real healthy yourself right now. Nice try, Alex said, smiling. Max wasn't kidding, but he didn't say that. Instead, he reached across the table and tapped the skin on Alex's arm. It felt normal, but what should have been a pink color under the fingerprint had a faint green tinge to it. Feels green to me, Max said. Michael again snorted. Looks green from here. Alex looked down at his arm. The smile drained from his face as he studied the backs of his hands. As everyone watched, the green seemed to grow darker on Alex's arms and face, becoming a prominent color of his skin, replacing the normal tones that were there just seconds before. Oh man, I am turning green, Alex said, his voice low and shocked. What's happening to me? In the booth behind Max, the two tourists slid out, stood, and dashed for the door, banging it open as they rushed to get out of the restaurant. Come back any time, Maria said after them. Having customers turn green can't be good for business, Michael said. This time, no one laughed. It wasn't our fault, Liz said. Kyle was green when he got here. No one mentioned it until I came in this door, Kyle said. Everyone stared at one another except Alex, who kept poking the skin on his arm. So what are we going to do? Kyle asked. I can't stay like this. We're going to take both of you to the hospital, Max said, standing and indicating that Alex should as well. And I don't think we should waste any time. What happens if it has something to do with the cave? Michael asked, staring at Max. They were both in it, and that was only a couple of weeks ago. Are you sure going to the hospital is wise? Alex nodded, still holding his green arms away from his body, as if letting them down might cause him to catch something. Those blue crystals melted all over us. Max didn't want to think about how close they had come to losing both Kyle and Alex in that cave. But Michael did have a point. There could be a connection. Damn it, Kyle said. I knew I shouldn't have helped you. I knew it. I've probably been infected with some alien life form or something. We don't know the blue crystals melting is what is causing this, Max said. Do we, Michael? Michael shrugged and said nothing. Then what else could it be? Kyle demanded, staring at Max as if Max had all the answers. Anything, Liz said, moving around the counter to comfort Kyle where he stood beside the sink. This could be caused by anything, something in the air, a government test, bad water, anything at all. That's right, Michael said. For all we know, the entire town could be turning green. Yeah, right, Alex said, his tone disgusted. A whole bunch of little green men in Roswell, New Mexico. Again, no one laughed. Actually, Liz said, Michael's just might be right. She pointed out the window. Max followed where she was pointing. On the sidewalk across from the cafe, a woman went past, heading for the nearby hospital at a very fast walk. She was a fairly bright shade of green under her blonde hair. The sun made the color on her arms seem even brighter. Max didn't know if he was glad to see it wasn't just Alex and Kyle or not. Uh-oh, Alex said. I'm sorry, Maria. About what? Maria demanded. Max turned back from the window and could see exactly what Alex had meant. Maria was also changing, her light skin growing darker and more green tinted with each passing moment. They all stared at her, the silence in the restaurant growing more and more intense. What? Maria said, moving to brush a strand of her hair off of her forehead. As she did, she saw her hand. No! The shout echoed a couple of times around the restaurant as Maria dived for the sink to try to wash the color away. Liz moved to comfort her, but Maria brushed her off. I've got to wash this off. This can't be happening to me. It just can't. It doesn't wash off, Kyle said. I tried, remember? Let's head for the hospital, Max said. Maybe they know what's happening. Michael, help Maria. Michael moved to Maria's side and handed her a towel, then headed her away from the sink towards the front door. I can't be green, Maria said, staring at her arms and hands. I just can't. I'll still like you just as much, Michael said, shrugging. She brushed him aside. No, you don't understand. I hate green. I never wear green. Yes, you do, Liz said. Not this green color, Maria said. This is shamrock green. I don't wear anything darker than lime green. It makes my hair seem washed out and dull. I think that's the least of your worries right now, Michael said. Maria glanced at him. I'm not supposed to be green. Green is for characters in comic books, guys that fight Spider-Man. I can't be green. Michael rolled his eyes and Liz smiled nervously at Max. Let's go, people, Max said. He wanted to get out of here to see how many other people in town were changing color and if they were becoming any color other than green. It just can't be happening, Maria said. Don't worry, Michael said, heading her towards the front door. We'll have you back to pale and sickly in no time at all. I need to stay and watch the restaurant, Liz said. Max nodded. We'll be back as soon as we can. He touched Liz's hand gently, then moved in behind Kyle. With a gentle shove, he pushed the stunned ex-football player towards the front door. Alex followed, then Michael and Maria. The chime over the door jangled as they went out into the warm afternoon sun. It was a beautiful early March day, the leaves just starting to fill out on the trees. Michael and Maria led the way, followed by Kyle and Alex. Max brought up the rear with one last look at Liz, standing alone and stunned at the front window of the restaurant. On the street, people stared as they passed. 2 aliens escorting 3 green humans down the street. If it wasn't so serious, it just might have been funny.
Chapter 2, A block from the hospital, Max knew the situation was even worse than he had imagined. Cars jammed the tree-lined two-lane road that led into the hospital parking lot. Some people had simply pulled their cars up onto the grass and left them there, deciding to walk the rest of the way. Others sat in traffic, like commuters on a Los Angeles freeway, waiting, either the driver or one of the passengers green-skinned. With just over 50,000 people, Roswell wasn't tiny, but it definitely wasn't used to this kind of traffic near the hospital. Kyle and Alex had the lead, with Michael and Maria and Max following as they passed stopped cars, speedy walking as if they were late for class. On the sidewalk ahead of them, two green-skinned women were walking in the same direction, talking as if out for a walk in the park. Clearly, whatever was causing people's skin to turn green was fairly widespread through the town. Now, Max wished he had thought to turn on the television to see if it was a national problem or even worldwide. Maybe some sort of strange solar radiation had caused this. There was just no telling. No one seemed physically ill. Kyle, Alex, and Maria said they felt no different than usual. No headaches or stomach aches or exhaustion. If they hadn't been told that their skin had changed color, they wouldn't have even realized it. So far, Max thought that was a hopeful sign. He was really worried that other symptoms would show up later, that the green skin was just some kind of weird warning sign of something more serious. This doesn't look promising, Alex said. The glut of cars was getting worse the closer the group got to the small hospital. 3 stories tall, white stucco, surrounded by a park-like setting and shade trees, Roswell Mercy Hospital was one of the nicer buildings in the town, in the most modern. Right now, there were crowds of people milling around the emergency room entrance. Both were green and normal-colored skin. 2 ambulances were stopped there, lights still strobing, back doors standing open. Yeah, Michael said, maybe we should head back and just sit tight until we figure out what's going on. I'm not staying this color a second longer than I have to, Maria insisted. Get me a doctor, stat. Michael glanced at Max over Maria's head and just shrugged. Max could tell from Michael's expression that he thought Maria was overreacting, but Max didn't. She might be focusing on the color, but Max was worried his friends would suddenly develop other symptoms. We at least need to check inside, see what's going on, Max decided. He didn't add that he had no other ideas at the moment. Good, Maria said. I don't really want to be the designated green person around here. People will start thinking I'm the alien. Michael put his arm around Maria. Fortunately, aliens aren't green. At least the ones we've met so far, she mumbled. Be careful, you guys, Alex said, just before Max could. Kyle had walked a few yards ahead of them. He stood, his hands on his hips, and stared at the people gathered outside the emergency room doors. We're not going in that way, he said. The emergency room can make you wait hours on a slow day if you're not dying, and it doesn't look like any green person is dying. At least not yet, Alex said ominously. Not funny, Maria said, glaring at him. Didn't mean it to be, Alex said. Max agreed with Kyle. He doubted that they could get to the crowd at the emergency room door, let alone get a doctor to take a look at Maria and Kyle and Alex any time in the near future. 2 police cars were now trying to get to the hospital, their sirens working to nudge the stalled traffic out of their way. That was just going to complicate things here even more. Let's go around to the west side entrance, Max said, pointing off towards another parking lot on his right. Employee entrance, Michael said. Good thinking. Max just nodded. It might get them into the building, but he doubted from the looks of the mess around the emergency room door that any doctor would give them the time of day. But at the moment, doing something was far better than doing nothing. Crashtown had never felt so isolated and empty and quiet. Outside, the beautiful spring day signaled that life should be just fine. A day when people got out, enjoyed the sun, visited the attractions of Roswell, laughed and played. Normally on a weekend afternoon like this one, there would be people coming in and out of the restaurant constantly, buying sodas, milkshakes, or just asking for a glass of water. They should be joking or having serious conversations, sweating or looking cool and relaxed. The place would feel alive, but it didn't. Liz was there alone. She should probably have been grateful that no one had come in since Alex, Kyle, Maria, Michael, and Max left. If someone did enter, she would have to handle the tables and the grill by herself. But she wouldn't mind the distraction right about now. Having no one to talk to is driving her crazy. Liz could see a few people on the sidewalk and some traffic, but nothing like normal at all. And no one seemed to be smiling or enjoying the sunny spring day. She tried to keep herself busy by wiping down the counter at every table, filling the salt shakers, and refilling the ketchup bottles. But now that Every possible chore was done. There just wasn't much left except sit at the counter and worry. She made herself a cherry cola, then sat on the end stool, trying not to look at the front door every few seconds. The emergency room was going to take time, and if the next hour went by and no customers came in, she'd close up and join them there. For the moment, she needed to pretend that life was going onward just fine, and this was nothing but a normal weekend. But the silence in the empty chairs and booths made pretending hard. Outside, a man wearing a suit walked by, the skin on his face and neck bright green, almost matching his tie. He was headed in the direction of the hospital as well. Nothing was normal. She held her hand up and stared at her own skin. So far, whatever was causing this hadn't touched her. She didn't even know if it was a disease or if it was contagious. Maybe she was going to turn green in an hour. There was no way of knowing. It suddenly dawned on her that maybe this was happening to more than just Roswell. She moved around the counter and clicked on the radio. The news would tell her. Music from the oldie station her mom kept the radio turned to filled the restaurant, giving it a false sense of life. She flipped the radio from station to station, pausing at each to listen for special reports. Nothing but normal weekend programming all the way around the dial. It seemed that the problem had not yet reached that level of interest. But how could the local radio stations ignore people turning green? Maybe that meant the problem really wasn't as big as it had seemed at first. Maybe it was only happening in this part of town? She left the radio tuned to the oldie station and went back to her stool. Even under normal conditions, she hated slow times in the restaurant. She liked it more when the place was packed and she was busy every second. The time flew past then. Now it dragged by, each second seeming to tick slower and slower on the drink Coke clock on the wall. Behind her, the chime over the door announced someone had come in. She swung around, hoping to see the entire group. Instead, Tess strode in, glancing around at the empty booths. Like the other alien teens, she was still her normal skin color. Whatever this was, it didn't seem to be affecting any of them. Yet. Wow, Tess said. It's not often you see this place so quiet. Yeah, Liz said, turning back to cola. You want something? Over the last few months, she and Tess have reached a sort of uneasy truce. But Liz still wasn't comfortable alone with Tess. Considering how close Max felt to Tess, Liz's unease bothered her. If Max trusted Tess, why didn't she? Nothing at the moment. Tess moved over and stood at the end of the counter next to Liz. I passed two people headed over here who looked like they had turned green. What's going on? Liz quickly went through the events that had happened earlier. She ended with, Max told me to stay here and wait for them to return. Have you seen Isabel? Tess asked. I think she went to a movie with some college guy, Liz said. Max said they were coming in here after it was over. Tess moved around and down beside Liz. Doesn't Maria have her cell phone? You could call her and get an update. Good idea, Liz said, sliding off her stool and going around to get her own cell phone out of her purse behind the counter. She was amazed she hadn't thought of it half an hour ago. It took her 3 tries before she finally gave up. All the circuits were jammed. Clearly this was a bigger emergency than the radio, with its benign oldie songs, was letting on. She put the cell phone on the counter between her and Tess and slid back up on her stool. Now what? Tess asked. We wait, Liz said. I hate waiting, Tess said. Tell me about it. The hallways of the hospital were mostly empty, with a single nurse who seemed to be in charge of the entire section of rooms. There was no one with green skin in sight, and no crowds in this part of the building. Max didn't know if that was a good thing or a bad thing. The nurse, a solid-looking woman around Max's mother's age, was sitting behind a large counter. She glanced up at them without surprise, then pointed. Emergency room down the hall. Keep turning to the left. Then she went back to work on the paper in front of her. Thanks, Max said. The nurse nodded without looking up. As they turned the corner of the hallway, the noise increased as if someone had turned up the volume of the speaker. A man was shouting over the rumble of others, while 2 calming voices tried to reassure the angry man. This doesn't sound good, Alex said. Most of the doors along this area of the hallway had been closed, clearly to shelter the patients in their rooms from the noise. Max had to agree that the sounds up ahead didn't sound positive. Anger in a hospital never seemed to bode well. It meant the situation was getting out of control, if it ever had been in control. They rounded one more left corner, and again the volume increased, as if they were suddenly in the middle of a large crowd at a basketball game. Down the hall, Max could see the man who was shouting, facing off the doctor and a nurse. Beyond them, the waiting area of the emergency room was packed with green-skinned people. some holding the hands of spouses while skin was still a normal color. There had to be at least 100 people jammed into that small space in the nearby hallways, with more in the door and airlock, and none of them looked happy. Max stopped with his friends following suit. The man waved a green arm in front of the doctor and shouted, "You're telling me you have no idea what's wrong with me? Why not?" The doctor, clearly tired of arguing, turned to face the crowd. "Listen to me, everyone." But no one did. They all just kept talking, trying to be heard over the noise to the point where everyone was almost shouting. "Listen up," the doctor yelled, his voice powerful and carrying clearly. For a moment, Max didn't think anyone would stop. Then slowly the noise died enough for the doctor to be heard. "We're working as hard as we can to find out what is causing the skin color change," the doctor said, his voice loud and forceful. "Right now, every doctor in the hospital is studying the problem, as well as the doctors at the base. We have some skin specialists flying in from Albuquerque. They're due on the base in an hour." Max glanced at Michael, who only shook his head, clearly not happy with what he had just heard. It made sense to Max, though. Of course the military would be called in a case like this, but he and Michael couldn't be caught inside a medical testing area. There was just too much of a chance of the doctors discovering the wrong things. "I need everyone," the doctor said, raising his voice over the slightly increasing noise, "to just relax and work with us. As far as we know, this is only a local problem, so there's an answer. You just have to give us time to find it and get you all back to your normal skin color." "How long will that take?" someone shouted from near the emergency room door. "We have no way of knowing," the doctor said, struggling to be heard over the growing noise. "If it's something simple, an hour or two. If not, it's going to take longer. That's all I can tell you." That didn't please the crowd, but at least the man standing in front of the doctor had stopped yelling. "I don't like the sound of this," Michael mumbled. "Well, I'm not going anywhere," Maria said, "until they give me back my pasty white skin. I never thought I'd miss it." "The skin seems to be the only thing affected," Max pointed out. "No one looks really ill, so far," Alex said. "I think the doctors would mention it, put the really sick people in one area, the mildly sick in another, and the simply color challenged in a third," Max said. "Color challenged?" Maria asked. "Is that an attempt at humor?" "I think old Maxwell is trying for some political correctness," Michael said. "Someone should probably tell him it's not working," Alex said. "Why aren't you guys taking this seriously?" Max asked. "What are we supposed to do?" Maria asked. "Go shout like that one guy has been?" Kyle shook his head. "I, for one, don't feel like just sitting here and getting them run around." "And what exactly did you have in mind instead?" Alex asked. "Sitting on my couch at home in front of the television," Kyle said. "Someone call me when they find a cure and get this crowd taken care of." With that, he spun around and headed off down the hallway, back in the direction they had come in. Max didn't blame him at all. In a way, it sort of made sense, considering the mess they were facing down the hall. Are you going to let him just leave?" Maria asked, staring first at Michael, then Max. Michael shrugged. "It's not my day to watch him. We can't do anything," Max said. "There's no point in forcing him to stay here if he doesn't want to." Max," Alex said, pointing to a nearby room, "you need to look at this." Max glanced in the direction Alex had pointed. Through the window of the empty room, Max could see the street running to the employee parking lot. 3 open truckloads of army men went past, every man seemed to be carrying a rifle. "They're probably going to turn the hospital into a green humans jail," Maria said. "Quarantine," Alex agreed. Max knew what the army was about to do seemed very logical. If whatever was turning people green was a disease, then keeping it contained was the only answer. But he and Michael couldn't risk being imprisoned in the hospital and being subject to medical tests. "We've got to get out of here," Michael said, "and fast." "We're going back the way we came," Max said. "Stick with me." He turned and ran down the hallway towards where the nurse had given them directions. He had no doubt the soldiers would be unloading in the employee parking lot, on the opposite side of the building from the emergency room. That way, by the time anyone out front knew what was happening, it would be too late. They would be surrounded. But that employee door was also the one they had come in. Just before they reached the nurse's station, Max stopped and glanced down a side hall. It looked as if it led to some sort of closed cafe, and that meant there would be a kitchen entrance on the outside. "This way," he said, keeping his voice low enough not to let the nurse hear. Down the hall, he could see 6 men in uniforms with rifles starting through the employee entrance. The group was running out of time. The door to the cafe was locked. Michael pushed Alex aside and put his hand on the lock. Max glanced around while Michael quickly unlocked it. They hurried inside. Max waited until last, making sure his green friends went in first. The soldiers were getting closer, but they hadn't seen him yet. Finally, he slipped through the door, shutting it quietly as the soldiers passed, their boots thumping on the smooth tile of the hallway. Block that, Max said, pointing at the door, and blocked it with a table. We're not planning on staying in here, are we? Maria asked. She and Alex moved to push a table against the door as Michael relocked the door. No, Max said. I'm just buying us a little time. Good, Maria said. I hate cafeteria food. Max led the way behind the counter and into the dark kitchen. It smelled of cleaning solution and old oil. Clearly, this kitchen hadn't been used in some time. More than likely, it was just a secondary place in case the hospital got full. No doubt they were going to open this up real soon. With all the people the military would probably be trapping in the hospital. Staying in here wasn't an option. The back door had a deadbolt and a lock, both of which Max eased open as quietly as he could. No point in alerting the guards standing outside that they were coming. He motioned that everyone behind him should stay quiet, then eased open the door a crack. The doorway was elevated slightly over the road so that trucks could back up to it and unload supplies easily. A staircase went down to the right towards a dumpster. On the other side of the road, Max could see some thick trees and brush. Beyond that, he knew was the country club. From what he could remember, it was the one time he'd gone there with his father years before. It had a lot of trees and brush as cover as well. So all they had to do was make it to the other side of the road and into the brush without being seen. He eased open the door a little bit more and stuck his head out. To the right, he could see one of the military transports parked so that it blocked the road so no cars could leave, but there was no one in sight. The left side was also clear to the end of the wing. The military was so concerned about rounding up everyone in the area of the emergency room that it hadn't yet set up guards at all the other entrances. We need to go fast and quick, Max said. Follow me, and if we get split up, meet back at the crash down. And try not to let the military or any cops see your green skin, Michael said. My guess is they're starting to round everyone up. If not yet, they will soon, Max agreed. Let's go. Making sure that both directions were still clear, he opened the door and in 2 steps was across the small loading platform, jumping down onto the road. Alex was beside him, and Michael made sure Maria didn't stumble on the jump. So hard no one could see them. Suddenly, Max got the feeling that they shouldn't do anything to draw any attention to themselves. Walk naturally, Max said. Stay together. Moving casually as if they were out for a stroll, they walked across the road, down through a shallow drainage area that had been planed to look like desert, then up into the more natural brush. Alex stuck his hands into his pockets. Maria did the same. She also put her head down, letting her hair cover her green face. Michael and Max flanked Alex and Maria so that they wouldn't be as visible from the road. To Max's left, he could see some soldiers facing the emergency room, guns at their sides, standing at parade rest. They were trying not to look threatening, but their intention was more than clear. No one was getting past them. The soldiers didn't seem to notice the group as they ducked into some thicker brush. 50 paces later, they reached the fence that surrounded the country club. Using his alien ability to manipulate matter, Michael cut them an opening large enough to crawl through. Beyond the fence, they found themselves in trees with a park-like setting. Just for the trees was the wide, lush green of a fairway. I think we made it, Michael said. Now we just have to make it back to the crash down without anyone seeing us, Maria said. It doesn't matter, Max said. If regular people see us, only police and military. He's right, Alex said. This is happening so fast, I doubt the normal people on the street even know this problem. And from the looks of the number of people back there, not a large percentage of the city's population is affected. Yet, Maria said. Max didn't like that, though, but he knew there was a good chance that many more people were going to turn green before this was solved. And if green was only the first step in some sort of disease, then this city, and maybe the entire country, was in trouble. Maybe we should go back in there, Alex said, staring at Maria and turning towards Max. We don't know if we're contagious or not. Staying in there at this point isn't going to help, Max said. We'll keep you two isolated at the crash down, just in case. Besides, Michael said, the food's better at the restaurant. Alex nodded, clearly not certain, but not wanting to go back into that mess any more than Max did. You bragging about your greasy fries again? Maria asked as she and Michael headed through the trees towards the fairway. You don't have to go far to get better than hospital food, Alex said, glad to think about something else. Before Michael could say anything, Maria patted his arm and smiled at him. I think your cooking is better than hospital food, don't you, Max? No comment, Max said, smiling at Alex as Alex and Maria laughed at the frown on Michael's face. You guys are finding this funny now, Michael said. But if the army stays, we're in big trouble. I know, Max said, the smile leaving his face. Believe me, I know.
So if there's one thing this book is not afraid of, it's a long chapter.
Yeah, I'm starting to run out of breath.
First one was 15. This one was 15. Chapter 3 is 19 pages.
Maybe we should split that one up when we read it. If not tonight,
Yeah.
Sunday.
I agree. Jess, what do you got for us?
What do you want from me?
Everything. We want everything from you.
So what do you got for us, Jess?
I don't want to give too much away because you're gonna. Well, let's see. I know that Liz is gonna use her scientific knowledge to help with the crisis.
I read that on the back cover.
Everybody, huh? I know.
Give me something I could use.
Connect us back to the episode that some of us watched last week and some of us forgot to watch.
Yeah, that's why I said to watch it. That's why I put it there because they mentioned every single thing.
Watch it now. Watch the Crystal episode.
Connect us now. Remind us, Jess.
Of what? Remind you what? The Crystal episodes where they were stuck in a cave and they had to get them out and they leaked on them and it tried to eat poor Alex and Kyle and that's when Michael went to the mansion and met his DNA relatives and Valenti took that cop lady that I don't remember her name and they blew up that weird looking squid thing. Alien that was inside of Grant.
That was like a weird jellyfish thing.
Yeah, like a jellyfish.
It was like flying around that room, and I remember it was going to hit the window, and that's why they shut the door. It was freaky.
Well, she comes back later. She's a key player at the end of this thing in Turnabout. She'll be back. Because that whole thing that happens haunts her. Because she talks about that a lot. So she keeps in contact with Valenti this whole time. But we don't ever see that in the series. But she's a key player at the end. Just remember that when we get there. But because she wanted to turn that in to the FBI, but she decided not to. So then she goes and does some digging about the special unit. She said something's not right about this unit. So she uses that knowledge to help them, which is great. Let's see what else we got going on. Isabel, we get some more Isabel in this one. She's coming up. We don't get introduced to Jesse yet. Jesse comes, I think, in the next book. But see, in the series, we just get thrown into Jesse, and we're like, who's this guy? Well, he's in every single book from the next on. So you get more into...
So there's more build-up, and not just like all the
stuff. Yeah, more build-up and insight into that, right. And you know what, I didn't know what to think of Jesse. Some people hated him, some people liked him, some people... But I really appreciate him, and you will too. You will definitely appreciate him more, especially when he pretty much saves Michael from. They try to get Michael for the murder of his father. So they bring him into court, and he goes to jail, and but he helps save
Michael's
Michael.
father gets murdered?
They accused Michael of murdering his dad when it was in Sato. They all know it was in Sato did it.
Well, his foster dad, right? So.
Yeah, his foster dad.
He wasn't exactly like the greatest
man. So
anyway.
They have to try to figure out how to unframe him without saying too much, because they can't say, well, some alien blew him up in the woods. Like they can't say any of that stuff. So Jesse helps him to not go to prison, which is good. So we got a lot of that. Okay, like I said before, this is our last Alex book, which is super sad, and our last Tess book, which is super glad. Because I don't like her, which we all know. But so you're gonna get right. But she's a major player in here, fortunately. But
Unfortunately, it's like we have to trade Tess's exit for Alex's exit too.
right. Well, her powers are extraordinary. I mean, we need them a lot for things, so I get that. And she does. She's very helpful. Like in the last one, she used her powers to keep them safe, and she's gonna do it again. But I still don't like her. She's still evil. She still ends up manipulating poor Alex.
I think a lot of that has to do with Niceto raising her, you know, and what she was told is her destiny growing up. So
yeah, I think, as Kyle bravely put it, he was like, well, of all the aliens, you were the one that were, I don't remember how his exact line, but he was right. Because I mean, you can't use that as an excuse. People are raised by terrible parents all the time, and they don't kill people. So, you know, alien or not, no.
Yeah, I mean, she said that in the episodes it wasn't like intentional for her to kill Alex, but she had mind warped him to the point where he was too weakened. It's like, come on, she had to know on some level that she was slowly killing him.
Right. And she manipulated Max, period. Like, because she knew what she wanted out of him. Makes me mad.
Yeah.
It makes me mad.
Yeah.
So,
girl, the same thing we all want.
Yeah. I still remember myself screaming and running from the room when Max and Tess slept together.
I still have trouble watching. I still yell out too.
Watched it.
Well, we watched that episode on one of our Sunday.
Yeah, we all were like,
I would have died.
Oh, we gotta watch the baby making episode because it was the random episode. It was what came up with the randomizer. It's like, all right, we'll just grin and bear it, you know.
Well, and did they have to make it so sensual? Couldn't have just been like the first time awkwardness for the two of them. Why did it have to be so sensual?
I'm still really pissed off at him. I'm so mad that he didn't have a freaking condom. Okay, first of all, when Future Max came back, the first thing he was telling about when they had sex, he said, "Don't worry, I have protection." So you have protection for the woman you love, but not Tess. Excuse me, no. Makes me mad.
Could have been a mind warp. Maybe he didn't want to sleep with her. Maybe it was a mind warp.
That's what I always thought when I was a teenager. I had to convince myself, no, Tess mind warped.
She mind warped him not to put it on.
That's what I told myself when I was a teenager, whether it's true or not, because I had to deal with it somehow.
No, he'd be like, hold on, I gotta put this on, and mind warp him. No, you don't.
He's like, don't worry, I won't get pregnant.
Or he thought maybe he thought he didn't get pregnant.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Well, he believes anything she says because when she comes back, she's like, "Oh, the baby can't survive without me." Really, you gonna believe that bitch? Like, seriously?
That's what I was gonna do when we talked about Tess.
I really feel like she did mind warp him to an extent. Like,
yeah, everything she did was a mind warp, in my opinion.
Yeah.
No, I think
it's easier for us to deal with her that way, just to believe that she like mind warped Alex and Max.
Well, even still, see, and even after he saw her with Kyle, which he talks about in his book, he still wants to get back with her. He still was in love with her the whole time. So that's why, to me, I'm like, I don't think Future Max completely disappeared. It just changed.